Good afternoon and welcome. It's the parking attendant. It's true. In a moment, I will introduce our special guest speaker, Ken Greene. First, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping details. The quickest way to exit this building in the event of emergency is through the double doors you came in through. There is one restroom on this floor, which is to your left as you enter the lobby, and there are two more down the stairs to your right. We ask that you please turn off or mute any cell phones or pagers or any other kind of beeping electronic devices at this time. And with the exception of Shumei's media staff, we also respectfully request that you refrain from taking photos, video, or any other electronic recording. Thank you. Did I say check your cell phones? Yeah. Our special guest speaker, Ken Greene, is founder of the first seed library in the country, a project that germinated in a small town library where Ken was, guess what? The librarian. That humble small town seed library morphed, changed, and grew into the Hudson Valley Seed Company, a national seed source devoted to producing seed for home gardeners and farmers that celebrates seed through art. Ken's most recent endeavor is founding Seed Shed, a new nonprofit focused on seed justice. Ken serves on the board of directors for the Organic Seed Alliance, as well as the planning committee for the National Organic Seed Growers Conference. He has given presentations for the Northeast Organic Farming Association, Stone Barn Center for Food and Agriculture, the Culinary Institute of America, Seed Savers Exchange, National Heirloom Expo, Cornell University, Santa Fe Farmers Market Institute, and many other conferences and organizations. We're very pleased and happy to have him with us here in our little community just east of the middle of nowhere. Ken likes to say, if every seed is a story, then every plant is a work of art, bringing seed stories to life. If every seed is a story, then every plant is a work of art, bringing seed stories to life. I first heard Ken speak 2 years ago at the Green Life Food Festival, an event that Shumei sponsored in Los Angeles. As Ken was explaining his process of seeking out and commissioning works of art that illustrate the stories that each heirloom variety of seed has to tell, I was astonished at the commonality between his philosophy and Shumei's. Agriculture, art, spirituality, ring a bell? Ken is equally passionate about art as he is about seeds, and it seems to me that seed saving, seed education, and seed learning is indeed the heart of this man's spiritual practice. At the time I thought, boy, oh boy, I hope Shumei finds ways to continue working with this guy. Well, the good news is we have, and I believe we will continue to do so. I spent a very enjoyable 4 hours with Ken driving over Kenosha Pass, through South Park, over Poncha Pass, and into the San Luis Valley yesterday. Gosh, was that yesterday? Yesterday. We covered a wide range of topics on that drive, neither one of us at a loss for words. And I continued to find only more and more commonality. During this drive, it really sank in for me that Ken is much more than some guy who collects and sells seeds, and that seeds are much more than little things that grow into plants. When Ken brings seeds into a room, a gathering, a community, they become the medium by which people come together, find commonality and differences, heal wounds, and grow. Grow. Not just plants and gardens and fields, but grow ourselves, mentally, physically, spiritually. There is no real boundary between seed, earth, plant, people. We are life. We rely upon and grow together. Ladies and gentlemen, Ken Greene.
Hi. Thank you so much for inviting me. I didn't know what Crestone was. And when I was told I was going to Crestone, I looked online, tried to figure out what is Crestone. And I gotta say, the information online about Crestone does not in any way prepare you for what it's like here. It's just spectacular here. It's beautiful. I usually don't give a talk with notes, but for the sake of the translators, I tried to write down my thoughts, and I apologize in advance to anyone who's doing translation if I veer from the script. It's difficult for me to stick to what's on the paper. When I first started paying attention to seeds, it was new for me. I hadn't really thought about where food comes from, how food is grown, who grows my food. And so that was an education in itself, thinking about, oh, like it's not just from the grocery store, right? There's this whole world. And the wonderful thing about farmers markets, and especially living in a small community, is you can meet your farmer. You can talk to them about what they're growing. You can find out about what their growing practices are and what varieties they're growing. When I started asking those questions about seeds, I found that I could not get answers. I couldn't find out who grows seeds, how seeds are grown, where seeds are grown, what practices are used. And to me, when you can't get answers to what seems like should be a really direct question, it means there's something funny going on. There's a reason that people maybe don't want you to have those answers. And so I started paying more and more attention to seeds and really trying to figure out the place of seeds in our lives. And while I was sitting during the beautiful ceremony this morning and listening, I was looking around the room. I was looking at the taiko drum. I'm sorry, I'm totally off script right now. I was looking at the taiko drum, and I was thinking every part of that drum, for the most part, came from seed. The wood came from a seed that grew a tree. The hide on there came from an animal that ate plants that came from seeds. And then I was looking at the stage, and I was looking at the lamps, and I was thinking, this is wood, this is paper. Everything around us, when we look around, it all comes from seed. And yet, in our daily lives, we rarely, if ever, think about seeds, even though they are part and they touch us all day, every day, in many ways. So that was just part of what was happening for me during the ceremony and the chanting this morning. So part of this is that question that you just saw, what is a seed? And for many of us, when we think about seeds, we just think about what a seed grows, what it's going to produce for us. But that's just like one part of the definition. And so, this is a beautiful quote from Mokichi Okada: seed is the foundation of life. It goes back to what I was just saying. And when we look at life and we look at evolution, it's actually very interesting. So I'm going to take you way, way, way back right now. So seeds didn't show up evolutionarily until 400 million years ago, right? And so those were the angiosperms. There were plants before that, but those plants didn't reproduce through seed. So 400 million years ago, we find the fossil record shows some of the first plants that were reproducing through seed. But then it was still a very long time before animals started having relationships with those plants that produce seeds. So the first true seeds were from 160 million years ago. And the grasses, which became grains, so whether we're thinking about rice or corn or wheat, they came from ancient grasses. That was 25 million years ago, the first grasses, the ancestors of some of the most familiar foods to us. We didn't show up until about 100,000 years ago. And what's interesting to me about that is it means no matter how far we go back to our ancestors, to their ancestors, to the beginning of humans, our lives have been touched by seeds from the beginning. There's no human that we can trace back to whose life experience wasn't part of seeds wasn't surrounded by flowers, by pollinators, by those processes. So they're really integral to who we are as a species, as a human race. Seeds are part of us in that way. So when I think about seeds and what is a seed, I think a lot about culture. And for me, the history of civilization and the development of culture is the history of seed savers. It is the history of our ancestors who first learned how to save seeds, protect them, plant them again, to have a food source that they could depend on year after year. Most of us, though, when we think about what is a seed, you can sort of think back to your textbook definition, which is a seed is an embryonic plant enclosed in a protective outer covering. It sounds very scientific, and it is, but what it's really saying is that same as that quote that I just gave you. Seeds are alive. This is a living organism, and it's easy to forget that when you're holding a seed in your hand. It's so tiny, it doesn't move, doesn't have eyes and arms like us. You know, we're very limited in terms of what we view as life and what we don't view as life. But seed is a living organism. But that definition is just a small part of how I think about seeds. So this is a map that I shared at the anniversary in Pasadena. And this shows this theory of centers of diversity, that different plants came from different parts of the world, which means that those different varieties developed with different cultures. And at that time, when we look back this far, the seeds were really enclosed in certain geographic boundaries. People weren't traveling that much. The plants weren't traveling with people. And so they developed in particular climates, in particular pockets, certain types of soils, and with specific cultures. But as people began to travel, they took seeds with them. But what's interesting about this map for me, and a lot of what I use this map for, is to show that we all come from seed-saving ancestors. A lot of times we look to other cultures, especially for those of us who live in North America. We look to Native American or indigenous cultures as the seed keepers, or where seeds came from, like corn and squash and beans. But when we look at this map, we can all trace back to the seeds that our ancestors saved, and we can reconnect with that legacy if we want to in those particular plants. Part of thinking about this map and thinking about the words we use around seeds, one of the ones we use is cultivation, right? And cultivation, when you look at the root of that, the Latin root of that, it's to care for. And so this very ancestral relationship that we have for seeds wasn't necessarily a science-based relationship of how plants work. It was about caring for the seeds as a living being and the plants caring for us in return. It was a relationship. It was an interdependent relationship, an interspecies interdependent relationship that became really important. So as we traveled and the seeds traveled, this is a quote from Vandana Shiva, who said, "Seed is created to renew, to multiply, to be shared, and to spread. Seed is life itself." So this sharing and this spreading was part of caring for seeds. People didn't collect seeds just to hoard them or be in control of them. Seeds were shared freely. It was part of the commons. The same way that a water source would be shared, seeds would be shared. And this is a really interesting graph that I showed. So that first one was how seeds were bounded by geography. This one shows how seeds started to travel. So these are some of the more important commodity crops that are out there, and you can see how they started to go to different places in the world from their centers of origin. Then if we start to look at the diversity that was out there and what was out there, this is what the map starts to look like. It's a kaleidoscope, you know. This is a rainbow of seed sharing all over the world. And we're looking at, you know, many years for these seeds to travel like this. But seeds are intercultural. It's about polyculture as well. One of the other things that I think is important about looking at that kaleidoscope and thinking about seeds is that seeds are about generosity. When you plant a seed, it grows one plant. That one plant produces hundreds or thousands of seeds. And so as a reflection of us and what, you know, how we develop culture, when we look at that generosity of seeds and we think about our relationship to the seeds, it's really our role as caregivers to pass on that generosity. It would be kind of disrespectful, in my opinion, of the plants and their generosity to just say, all of that abundance is for me, and I'm not going to continue to share that with more people. So all of this travel and sharing wouldn't be possible without that generosity. The food that we eat, when we sit down to eat and we look at the food on our plate, that is an immigrant plate. That is a migration plate. That is a diversity plate. The foods that we eat came from all different cultures from all over the world. And we forget that. You know, we forget about those seeds. That relationship, the reason we have this diversity is because of this relationship. So a really interesting thing started to happen evolutionarily as we began to care for seeds. What happened was a lot of these early plants, they needed to protect themselves, especially when they were going to be reproducing. And so they had poisons, they had bitterness that didn't taste good to animals. They had spikes and thorny things. They had ways of producing rashes. As we developed this relationship, also they had very small fruits, most of them, not like the large fruits that we're used to today. This relationship, we were needing to be dependent on the plants, and as we began to save seeds, they realized that they could be dependent on us. We became their protectors. When we took on that role, it meant that the plants could let go of many of their natural defense mechanisms. They could do things that were more beneficial to caring for us. Larger fruits, sweeter tastes, more nutrients, no poisons, less bitterness, because they were trusting us. They were becoming more vulnerable in a way to care for us. There's a vulnerability to being a caregiver, and that was part of that relationship with seeds. So what have we done with this generosity, and what have we done with this relationship over time? Many of you have probably heard the term loss of genetic diversity. Have you heard that term? So that could mean, you know, your great-great-great-grandmother who came and immigrated to the United States, and she brought tomato seeds with her for a certain tomato, and those seeds were passed on generation after generation. But then there was one generation that didn't save those seeds, and that one variety and the stories and the culture that comes with that seed can disappear forever. But we're also talking about loss of genetic diversity with some of the world's most important staple food crops. So there was a survey done in the 1950s of rice in India, and they estimated 30 to 50,000 different varieties of rice in India. Rice for different elevations, dry farmed rice, wet farmed rice, rices for different types of dishes, medicinal rices, ceremonial rices, rices for dye. They redid that study in 2015, and they found 50 varieties of rice left from that original study. So sometimes we're talking about massive losses. That's part of what we've done with this generosity, and it's because we've forgotten about the central role of seeds in our lives. Wheat is a similar story. 100,000 varieties of wheat probably, when you really look back. And today, globally, there are 9 varieties that are grown by most farms. I'll just tell you what this chart is before I leave it. So this is a chart that was created by National Geographic, which is a really visual way of communicating about loss of genetic diversity. Those wider stripes at the top represent the amount of diversity there were for those different crops just 80 years ago. And then when you look down, you can follow that stripe and you see how skinny it gets at the bottom. That's a visual representation of how many of those varieties we've lost. So if you look at something like sweet corn, and we're just talking about commercial varieties here. We're not talking about the full diversity of what's available globally, just things that we depend on for food. Sweet corn up there says 307 commercially used varieties of corn just 80 years ago. When you follow that to the bottom, 12 left. So this is what we're facing, and this is our legacy. This is our responsibility. And a big part of this loss of genetic diversity, and I promise this is like the most depressing part of my talk, it gets better, it really does. There's hope. Hang in there with me. One of the main reasons for this loss of genetic diversity is the consolidation of seed resources. So this is a visual representation of the corporations who have consolidated or own the most seed resources on our planet. And you can see the biggest companies here are the red circles. So you have Monsanto, DuPont, Bayer, Dow, and Syngenta. And so what those chemical and pharmaceutical corporations were doing is buying up all those smaller circles that you see, some of which are plant breeding places, some of which are larger seed companies or wholesale seed houses. They don't change the names of those places, so it got really hard to trace where your seeds are coming from for a farmer or a gardener when you're getting seeds. I said that was the most depressing part, but it's not. This is what the map is going to look like soon. So Monsanto tried to take over Syngenta. They failed, but Bayer is buying Monsanto. It's been approved by the EU, and we did try and fight it, and there are people in this room who are part of that, for sure. Dow and DuPont are merging, and when Monsanto was unable to buy Syngenta, the Chinese National Chemical Corporation purchased Syngenta. So we're going to be left with 3 mega multinational corporations focused on chemicals and pharmaceuticals in control of over 90% of the seed resources globally. I'll let that sink in for a second, and then we'll get to the hopeful part. Back to this. So the wonderful thing about seeds and the powerful things about seeds is their resiliency. And the wonderful thing about people and the beautiful thing about people is our resiliency. It is not too late for us to rekindle this relationship, this ancestral relationship that we have with seeds. It's not too late to take on that cultivation, that care of seeds again. We actually can turn this upside down. We can not only preserve the genetic diversity that we have left, we can actually increase it again. But we need to become aware of seeds again. We need to think about seeds in our lives, and we need to understand what our impact is on seeds. So the spirit of seeds is really what I wanted to talk about today. We're not all gardeners, and we're not all farmers, and yet we all have an opportunity to connect with seeds and make a difference. Even if you never plant a seed in your life, there are ways to become a seed steward and rekindle that relationship. One of the things that we do as a seed company, like you were talking about, is commission artwork. And some people are like, oh, this is really clever marketing, your packaging is beautiful, which is great. I'm glad it's working for that. We're struggling to make a living growing and selling seeds in an ethical way. It's not the smartest way to it's not a get-rich-quick scheme for sure. But what the artwork is really about is helping people reconnect with the spirit of seeds. Artists, when I think about cultural creation, when I think about how we can change the world, when I think about bringing more awareness to our lives and having us really think about who we are as people and who we are culturally, I think of artists. Artists are like cultural seed savers. They're picking all of these different elements. They're thinking about what they think is important, what they think is beautiful, what they think is challenging, what they think is upsetting. And they're putting that all together and creating this work of art instead of telling us what to think, that gets us to think. Instead of trying to find a way to make us connect, they're inspiring us to connect. And so that's really why I started working with the artists. So this is an example of one of the works of art that we've commissioned. And I'm going to tell you a few of the stories that come with these seeds. I got a little bit off the, so this is what our seed packs look like when you open them up. Every pack is by a different artist, and it's this quatrefoil shape that's an origami fold that opens like a flower. And so I'm really grateful to Chimay for bringing some of the original works of art here to the Crestone Center in the gallery. And I've commissioned over 200 works of art, and I said, you can have whatever you want. I'll loan you whatever you want. And so a lot of thought went into choosing which works of art would be here today. And this is one of the ones I was really happy was selected. This is a work of art that was created for sacred basil. It's also called holy basil or tulsi. It's a medicinal basil. It's used for making teas and other medicinal preparations. And so when we work with an artist, I choose the artist I want to, I'm like matchmaker, basically. Artists apply, and I look at their work and what they create, and then I think about the varieties we have, and I think, oh, this artist needs to meet this plant. They have a lot in common. They're totally gonna hit it off. I gotta hook them up. And so sometimes it's the way that an artist tells a story through their art. Sometimes it's about the way they use color or texture or their medium. But I really loved this artist and asked her to do the sacred basil. So part of the reason I love that this is here in person, and I hope everyone has an opportunity after this to stand in front of this artwork. When you stand in front of this work, it radiates. Has anyone had a chance to go see the art yet? So just take a moment, if you haven't, to go in there, stand in front of it. You feel this radiating coming off of the artwork. And for me, that radiating is like an invitation. It's like a portal almost to really get into the connections of this beautiful, beautiful, important plant. And when I think about plants and our relationship with plants, I really think about the full life cycle of the plant being a circle. When we use plants for eating them or for medicine, we're interrupting the plant's life cycle, usually very early in the plant's life. That's when it's tastiest, or that's when we're using it. When we become seed savers, we're nurturing it through that full life cycle from seed to seed, which is a circle. But you'll also see she put in cultural elements here. This plant is originally from India. So there's the elephants, and the colors have to do with that culture. The mountains are in there. And then the full life cycle of the plant from seed to seed, including the flowering of the plant, is in there. So to me, it's a very healing work of art, and one that really invites us to meditate on the medicinal properties and the life cycles of that plant. This is what the seed pack looks like. So this next one is a work of art that we commissioned for komatsuna, which is mustard. It's one of the most mild of the mustards. A lot of people think of mustard greens as being very spicy and kind of horseradishy tasting. This is a very mild green, but the Asian greens in this family, they are packed with nutrients. These are really, really healthy greens to eat. They're fast growing, they're easy to grow, they grow in a lot of different climates. And I chose this artist, so her name is Molly Roche, and what she does is she collects stamps from all over the world. And then she'll put the stamp on a piece of paper, and she'll imagine the scene beyond the boundaries of that stamp. And so she has to change her style, her medium, the way she works to match what's in each stamp, because all those stamps are by different artists too. And the reason I chose her for this is because when I think about seeds and what is a seed, I think about we have to get beyond the boundaries of thinking about just that seed coat. You know, the seed coat is the hard shell of the seed that contains the nutrients and the life force of the seed. But it doesn't necessarily tell us about those cultural connections, the ancestral connections, and the spirit of the seed. We have to think beyond our own boundaries. And to me, that's what her art is about, is saying you may perceive boundaries, but there's always something beyond that edge, right? And we can push beyond that. Sometimes we have to use our imagination. Sometimes we have to use our hearts. Sometimes we have to use spirit. Sometimes we actually just have to get on the internet and do some research. Whatever way that we can use, whatever tools we have to push beyond those boundaries. And so that's what the work is for me. And also thinking about what stamps do. So thinking back to that map of when plants were bounded by their geography, we were also bounded in terms of how we communicated with other people and with plants and with animals. Mail, wow, when we were able to start writing letters and put a stamp on it and send it somewhere, suddenly we were able to communicate with people who weren't in our village, who weren't in our town. That was someone using their imagination to think beyond our perceived boundaries. We take it for granted now that we can communicate with people all over the world, but stamps were one of the early ways that really allowed us to have connections beyond the connections in our own neighborhoods. And so I really liked sort of that metaphor of the work as well, and how seeds also connect us beyond our own communities in that way. What I didn't know was that Alan Sensei is a stamp collector, and that when he saw this work of art, it turned out that he has this stamp. And so that is a picture of his stamp collection, which I think, did you have this stamp with you here? When he saw the artwork here, he happened to have this stamp with him, and it's also your birth year, correct? Yeah. So, you know, what are the chances that 5 years ago I commissioned a work of art and chose this stamp to represent this variety, and then we come to Crestone and you would have this stamp as well. So that was a really special moment. I'm so happy that this work of art made it into the collection here and had that moment of reconnection. I'm going to talk about just one more work of art that's with us here in the gallery. There's more works of art here. This is for Moonflower. Moonflower is one of my favorite flowers. It's a vine. It blooms in the evening and at night, and it attracts night pollinators. It's white. It's a pure white flower that forms in a spiral, and it blooms so fast you can actually sit there and watch it unspiral and open up. I mean, it's not quite that fast, but you don't have to be a super patient person to actually get to watch that flower bloom. And as soon as it's open, you'll start to see those night pollinators coming. It's a really magical moment for me to do that. And anyone who has the opportunity to grow it, you can have like a night viewing party and you can put out Although I hear the mosquitoes are really bad here, so I don't know if you want to do that. But Tona Wilson, who created this work of art, she actually creates walls. So her work is always a wall like as big as this wall. Usually she paints the wall black, and then there's white illustrations on the walls. This is the smallest work of art she's ever created that she did for us, but I was really interested in her walls. But to me, one of the things that I think about in terms of this reconnecting with seeds is that we're often unaware of how nature supports us. And one of the times that we're most unaware of is when we're sleeping. Nature doesn't stop. Nature doesn't stop her care of us and her support of us. So while we're asleep, there's so much going on ecologically. There's so much going on out there. And so when I think about moonflowers, I think about all that activity, the night pollinators, the things that are blooming at night, the animals that come out at night. So that wall that Tona created has all of the night creatures, all of those vespertine and night creatures that come out where nature never stops. And what I love about this work of art too, so that ladder, to me, nature is supporting that ladder and the woman on that ladder. And it's supporting her, again, to reach beyond our perceptions, to reach beyond to something greater, to some higher power. And that, to me, that's what the moon really represents, is this illumination of there's something beyond ourselves and greater than ourselves to reach to. Sometimes I look at it and I think of the moon as a seed as well. But of course, I see seeds everywhere. Like, you all look like seeds right now. But that's just my own issue. So I really love that idea of the plants supporting us in reaching to our higher power as well. And that's what the seed pack looks like there. So again, back to that question, what is a seed? And language is so powerful. And as we were looking at the way that corporations have taken over seeds and control of seeds, part of that was a redefinition of what is a seed. To them, a seed is a commodity. It's something to profit from. It's something to control. They took out that part of care, of life, of spirit, and when they stripped that answer of what is a seed of those things, and we agreed to that new definition, that's really what led to the initial loss of genetic diversity, the loss of diversity, the consolidation of seed resources, and our forgetfulness about how important seeds are in our lives. So even though it sounds like a simple question, it's a very complex question, and it's a very powerful question. It's the question that I really ask, that you each ask of yourselves, to think about what a seed means, and not accept the definition that we've been given by people, because it is people behind corporations, by people who are trying to deny us of our ancestral right to connect with seeds, our ancestral legacies, our agreements with the plants that we would care for them and they would care for us. So I always get a little worked up about that. Partly because when I first started this work and I would go to give a talk, there'd be like 3 people there, and which was fine. I wanted to connect with who I could connect with. And I never would have imagined that, for me, what is a seed? I often think of seeds as my guide, that I've been following seeds. And, to have the opportunity to work with Shumei, to be with a group of people like you, who care so much about the world, who care about people, who care about plants, and who care about spirit. I would have never imagined that seeds would have taken me to such great heights, 8,000 feet, and to meet so many wonderful people. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share the spirit of seeds with you and to encourage you to think of what is a seed, to really think seeds are an invitation. They're an invitation to renew your commitment to caring for seeds. And I hope that you get a chance to look at the artwork. I'm going to be going down there after the talk, and I love to talk about the art in front of the art. It's really enjoyable for me. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there, and then we can take some questions while we're here, and then I'll head down there. So thank you all so much. So, couple questions.
Could you say something about the wild rice seeds of Minnesota?
So all of our grains came from wild plants, and there are still places in the world where we can go back to those wild plants. And there's an amazing woman who works with wild rice in Minnesota and still harvests it the way that it was traditionally harvested. So they go out in canoes, and the wild rices are very, very tall, and you bend them over, and you actually thresh them into the canoe. And it's a beautiful, beautiful process. So there are places where we can look to where these relationships are still intact, and we can learn from those relationships again. Did you have a specific question about the rice itself, or it's Winona LaDuke by the well who, okay, yeah.
May I offer my first response and two questions? I look at a seed as a time-released DNA life capsule. And two questions. One is, this is incredible, beautiful things you are offering. Have you put this into a book that people can publish with all this incredible art and life?
So first of all, I agree with you. Seeds are like time machines. It's kind of amazing when you're working with seeds that they can connect us to the past and our ancestors. That moment of planting the seeds brings us into the present moment. You have to be very present when you're planting the seeds, and yet you're doing something that's about the future. And that's all happening in that same moment with seeds, the past, the present, and the future. In terms of writing a book, if I had time, I would love to write a book. I haven't figured out how to fit that in to running a seed farm, running a seed company, running a nonprofit, and coming to Crestone to speak.
Just
someday.
get a collaborator to just put all your pictures together in a book form. And my other question is, are seed companies like the Hudson Valley Seed Company you talked about and the one you've got in California, beyond the voracious grasp of Monsanto? Are you are you not vulnerable to these rapacious companies?
So it's a good question. When I took the seed library concept and turned it into a seed company, our goal was to be the most ethical seed company we could to be an independent source of seeds, and to offer basically an antidote to what was out there, which is a completely transparent seed source where you know where your seeds are coming from, who's growing them, how they're growing them, and that we're caring for seeds the way that we think is the most sustainable. In terms of their reach of our seeds specifically, the reason it's complicated is it's not like they're doing anything to target us specifically, but there's about at least 1,200, I think, outstanding patents now for specific traits in seeds. So what these companies are doing is they're identifying traits that are important to them for breeding, a lot of which are climate-ready traits, so heat tolerance in broccoli, we were having this conversation, a lot of the resiliency genes, and what they're trying to do is say, because they identified those genes that are in charge of that trait, that they can patent that trait, which would mean they own it, which would mean that no one else can do plant breeding or save seeds from varieties that have that patented trait in it. So that's going to affect us all if those patents are put through. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes work going on around that, and I'm not sure, we don't have time to get into it right now, but genetic engineering is the other way that those types of companies can prevent people from saving seeds. And now there's also utility patents. What utility patents do is says, we bred this variety that's for a specific use, and because we're putting a patent on the use, therefore you can't breed with these genetics. So there's a lot of challenges out there right now. That's part of the reason I work with the Organic Seed Alliance, because I want to do a lot of advocacy work and make sure that we're all aware of these issues and that we're doing everything we can legally and in DC around these issues. So that's a very brief answer to a complicated question.
Could I add, I think your nonprofit Seed Shed, that is much of, or you're doing work
Well,
around
Seed Shed,
those
the
issues.
nonprofit, actually is focused very much on cultural work with seeds, which does relate to this. Part of what we're trying to do is make sure that we're rematriating seeds back to their home communities and that those home communities have seed sovereignty. Because the more people that we have who have seed skills, who are producing their own seeds, the harder it is to police these threatening patents and other things that are happening. The more of us there are engaged in this work, the better it's going to be for the future of seed. The fewer people involved and aware, the more the corporations can get away with. So it is related in that way. Like right now we work with the Iroquois Mohawk. We're working with the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network. We identify varieties that are going to disappear. There's a Mohawk red bread corn that we've been working with. There were only 2 ears left in the world of this corn. And it was specifically for a ceremony. And they hadn't been able to do the ceremony because they didn't have the seed, the food that goes with the ceremony. And so that was a loss of culture to the Mohawk people. So over the last few years, we've produced about 2,500 pounds of the corn. They've been able to revive the ceremony that goes with it. They have their own seed stock. They have food. So we're working with many other varieties, but that's an example of that work. And now they have the skills and the infrastructure and the seed stock to have sovereignty with that variety, and it would be very difficult for anyone to take that away from them at this point.
What is the process of getting natural agriculture seeds?
So that's like the really cool thing that's happening with Shumei, is I've been doing some teaching so that natural agriculture farms will start to have the skills that they need to produce healthy seeds. Kenny Nakagawa is working with us on our farm, thanks to Shumei. So I feel like it's even more powerful way of working with Shumei to have someone on our farm who's seeing all of our processes. We're teaching him everything that we know, and then Kenny will be able to share all of his knowledge with the different farms. What's interesting about natural agriculture and not rotating varieties is that there's actually a lot of research that we need to do about how that affects the seed health. And that's a long-term process. So I'm happy that Shumei is really committed to not just jumping right in, but really making sure we're doing it right, making sure that we're going to be producing the healthiest seeds that we can for natural agriculture farms and Shumei gardeners who want to work with those seeds. And the fantasy, long-term fantasy, is that there would be a line of Shumei natural agriculture seeds. For now, when you're buying seeds from Hudson Valley Seed Company, and there's a few other folks that we can talk about if you want to, who I feel like are at least aligned with the values that you hold, which would be good sources. And there's definitely seed companies that I feel are not aligned with your values. And so that's sort of the beginning of seed literacy for Shumei, with the goal of having your own seed source.
Oh, yes, perhaps you told us, but I wanted to know where how long you've been doing this, where you got your education, and a day with iTalk It Types would put that book together pretty quick.
Okay, great. So I've been engaged in this work for 15 years. I didn't have any background in agriculture. I always had a good relationship with plants, but no one ever said you could do this with your life. It was sort of like, that's a fine hobby, but you need to be like a real profession. So I was a special ed teacher for many years. I worked with violent youth, emotionally and behaviorally disturbed youth. Then I was a librarian briefly. I was training to be an acrobat, actually worked with a Chinese acrobat troupe and trained with them for a few years. Initially, all of my education for this came from the plants themselves, and just saying, what is a seed? A seed is a teacher. So I'm going to let these plants go through their full life cycle, and I'm going to see what they do. Because I've never seen a parsnip go to seed. I've never seen a lettuce plant go to seed. What does it look like? What does it need? So that was the beginning of the education with plants. But then at a certain point, especially when we became a seed company and we had to start producing seeds, really had to get a really thorough education very quickly. So there were a lot of online resources. And then I started visiting different seed producers to learn about those practices. We're still like the weirdos in the seed world, in that many of the practices that I learned about, I actually didn't like. And it goes back to that sense of cultivation, of care. There are certain ways that seeds can be handled or processed that I feel are uncaring. So we do everything by hand. I believe that it's important for seeds to be touched, to be held, and for my hands to pass the seeds on to your hands, and then for your hands, if you're a seed saver, to pass those on. That's part of our legacy. That's part of how we pass on the culture of seeds and the spirit of seeds, is by touching them. So it's a little bit different what we do, but yeah.
I was just wondering, where do we find your seeds? Where is your your internet? Do you have a website, or I've never
Sure.
even heard of it before. So
Cool. I'm glad you haven't heard of it.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you are now.
Okay.
So we're the Hudson Valley Seed Company. Our website is hudsonvalleyseed.com. There's catalogs in the gallery, so you can grab a catalog. There's also cards in there that have a free shipping code on them, so you can grab one of those. So the full catalog is online. There's 400 varieties in the catalog this year. And one of the wonderful things about coming here and learning about the climate here is there's so much more in common between where I am in upstate New York and your climate here than I really realized. We have a short season, we have a really hot summer, we have a lot of the same pests and diseases. So basically all of our seeds will do well here as long as you know your planting dates, your frost dates, basically, which are a little bit shorter than us. We used to be a zone 5 and we just got bumped up to a 6, and someone told me that you were a 4 and you got bumped up to a 5. So we're really not that far off from each other. However, when I was just getting a wonderful tour of the gardens here and I reached into your soil, which is really sand, pulverized rock, I am very impressed that you're growing up here at all. So there are, some soil differences for sure compared to where I am. We do have an annual farm tour if you're ever in the Northeast and you want to come see what we do. We have an Airbnb on the farm, so if you're ever touring around and you want to spend some time on the farm, you can book the Airbnb. So that's how to find us. And then Seed Shed, our nonprofit, is seedshed.org. So if you want to read more about the cultural work that we're doing through the nonprofit, you can go there. The oldest in terms of the age of that actual seed, or so the question was, what's the oldest seed that we've ever grown? So there's a lot of tall tales out there about seeds being dug up in archaeological digs that are thousands of years old and being germinated and brought back to life. They are wonderful stories to exercise our imagination. Most of them aren't true, but the ones that are true, it's actually you need like a lab to germinate and grow a seed that's that old. In terms of what we can do without that type of technology, the oldest seed that I germinated was about 20 years old. It was a bean, a local heirloom bean variety. The library director of the library that I worked at, where I started the seed library, who was super cool when I was like, I want to add seeds to the library catalog so people can check them out. She was like, sounds great. She wasn't like, you're weird. So she actually said, you know what? My father had this bean that he used to grow every year. And his daughters, he had 4 daughters, they used to have to pick all the beans and shell them, which they resented, but they did it anyway. And they would bring the beans over to Flossie's house next door. And different people in the town of Ghent, New York, would grow different ingredients for baked beans. And all those ingredients went to Flossie's house. And Flossie had her recipe for baked beans, and she would make that recipe, and she'd make tons and tons of baked beans. And then if there was a church gathering or a fireman's parade or other community events, that was the community dish that was served. So Peg's father had passed about 5 years before I had started the seed library, and she knew where he used to keep those beans, his special selection beans to plant the next year. She went home to her mom's house. She went into the basement. The jar of beans was there, no lid, just a glass jar with about this many beans, a small jar like this. She brought them into the library. They were about 20 years old, maybe a little bit older. We were able to germinate 5 of the seeds in that jar and bring that variety back to life. And now it's gone through this whole program that we call Kitchen Cultivars. It's being served in restaurants all over the Hudson Valley. Farmers in our region are growing it. There's more of this bean than there ever was when her father was growing it. And Peg got to name the bean, and so she named it after her father. His name was Hank, and so it's called Hank's Extra Special Baking Bean.
I wonder if I can ask, in terms, there's several gardeners here who try to save seed.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you can give us any hints on what the best ways to preserve those seeds for a longest period of time would be.
All right. So yeah, I love teaching seed saving, and it is a question we get a lot about the storage of the seeds. Is that what you're asking about particularly? Storing them?
Primarily.
Yeah. So every plant family, just like we were looking at that map, and plants came from all over the world in different climates, and they had all different needs, and then people started saving them, and people were traveling, and they were bringing them to parts of the world that those plants weren't from. The plants didn't necessarily adapt quickly, and then sometimes never fully adapted to a new climate. And so that's why, in most cases, we have to store the seeds for the winter. Most of the foods we like came from warmer climates, and if you just left them out, the seeds would be killed by the winter. So what we've learned over time is that different plant families have different longevity, and it really has to do with their reproductive cycle. Something like an allium, your leeks, your onions, your chives, all of those, they have a 1-year storage life, and then they're done. There's no reason to really try and plant a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old allium seed, no matter how you stored it. For almost everything else, you're looking at least 2 years, and sometimes you're looking up to 5 years for really healthy, to keep the seeds healthy. But because the seeds are alive, they're using up their internal resources as they're being stored. So what we do is we keep them cool, dark, and dry. Basically, the plants are looking for anything to tell them to start growing. They're looking for warmth, they're looking for moisture, and they're looking for light. Those are the triggers for seeds, where seeds are like, I'm safe now, it's time to go, I can grow. So if they're cool, dark, and dry, then their metabolism slow down, and then you can store them for a longer period. You don't want to freeze them. There's only certain varieties, wild varieties, that need a little bit of winter, but most of our domesticated varieties, you'd actually kill them by putting them in the freezer. People put them in their fridge sometimes. Fridges have high humidity usually, but the temperature is good and the darkness is good, so you just want to make sure it's in a sealed container so that it's not being affected by the humidity inside your fridge. And then every year that you have those seeds, just plant more than you normally would, because some of those seeds will have expired and some will be okay. Yeah. Oh, I'm going to go behind you because he hasn't gotten to it. So a lot of people think about the Svalbard seed vault in Norway, which is this like deep freeze, kind of like cryogenic, in the middle of a mountain storage of seeds. They have the technology to dry the seeds down to about 2% moisture content within the seed. For most of us, I mean, it's a lot drier here than where it was, where I am. I can't get seeds down below like 15% moisture inside the seed. So if I froze those seeds, the water molecules would expand and it would burst cells in the seed and it would kill them. If you can get them really dry, then you can start to freeze them, which does prolong the storage life more. I didn't bring, did we send calendar? I don't think we did, sorry. Yeah, we do a calendar every year of the new artwork, yeah.
Hi, I work in Uzbekistan, and I love the cosmoses in a certain town. They are the most glorious colors that you never see in the United States, where I've traveled. So I collect the seeds of the cosmoses of the colors that I love.
Wonderful.
Couldn't wait for the growth. No colors alike.
Interesting.
And I'm still on another batch. It's now about 9th year that they reseed themselves, and each year it gets colorless and colorless and colorless.
Yeah. So what's interesting is that is part of that relationship that I was talking about between people and plants. Most of the varieties that we have maintain their flavor or their color or the things that we as humans like about them because we're continually selecting those plants to have those traits. So a lot of plants, if we just saved the seed and then planted them and then saved all the seeds and then planted those and then saved all the seeds and planted those, they would start to kind of go their own way. We have to keep up that relationship to say, no, this is what I like about you. This is what I'd like you to continue to do. So there's a selection process there. Also, there's a lot of cross-pollination. So if you collected those seeds and there were multiple colors growing all together, they would have cross-pollinated and you wouldn't have gotten something that grows true to type. You would have had to collect it from somewhere where all of them were the same color that you like. No, but if the plants were growing near each other, they cross-pollinated before you got to them. So that mix already happened. So what you can do is grow as many as you possibly can, find the one that has the color when it's starting to bud, if you can identify the color before it opens and can get pollinated, and then you'll want to clip the buds off the ones that aren't the colors that you want, and only let the ones that are your color that you're looking for open and get pollinated, and then you'll start to guide that plant back to the color that you're looking for. Yeah. How are we doing on?
We dry our seeds. I mean, we save our seeds, but air dry them in the garage.
Great. That's
Sun
a good
dry
place.
them outside to hydrate them, which is the best
Yeah, so
of those three methods that we do. And put them in a paper bag.
it depends on what plants we're talking about. So there's wet processing and dry processing. Dry processing we do with any plants that produce seeds that are not encased in a wet fruit. So think about beans that are in a pod or flower seeds. You know, they're dry. You're leaving them on the mother plant as long as possible to get as many nutrients as they can. They dry on the plant if possible. Then you collect them. And if you need to dry them down further, in the garage, out of the direct sun, with good airflow, in a single layer is great. Wet processed seeds are everything that's in a wet fruit, like cucumbers and watermelon and tomatoes. Those seeds you need to wash really well and get anything off of them that could cause mold or hold moisture, and then you'll want to put them on screens with fans and really get them dry. That is a big difference between where I am and where you are, is that it's super humid where I am, and drying is an issue for us. I think it'd be a lot easier to dry things here in Crestone. At least that's how my body feels right now, kind of like, you know. So. any other? Those are really great questions. Thank you for the conversation. We can continue this down there. So you had a few things you wanted to say, and I'm going to head down there, or where are we at? Yes.
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
One.
This very particular corn that only grows in one village in Mexico, but it produces its own fertilizer. And it runs down the stem. I mean, it's the most amazing thing I've ever seen.
I haven't heard about that, but there are corns that fix their own nitrogen,
Yeah, but this is
which is really
fertilizer.
interesting. Huh.
I mean,
Yeah, I'm going to have to look that up now.
yeah, well, MIT went down to this village. I mean, they keep it very secret. I don't even know if, they publish it. But MIT went down to get the seeds. So they're growing it out in their greenhouses.
Right. It's fascinating. The diversity of the plant world is absolutely fascinating. And one of the things that I was mentioning about how plants gave up certain things and became more dependent on us, that relationship has continued, sometimes in really negative ways. So when we look at conventional agriculture and we look at the toxins that we put into the soil for fertilizer that are killing the soil, and we look at the toxins that are sprayed to kill insects, and we look at the toxins that are sprayed to kill other plants and herbicides.
Chemtrails.
Yep, well, not sure how that affects it, but when we look at those things, the plants have adapted to that type of agriculture. So whether we're talking about natural agriculture or organic agriculture, what we're finding is that the seeds like that we produce that are produced under certified organic practices, where we have living soils and we have living ecologies around our farms, those seeds grow better on organic farms and in organic gardens. And the seeds that are bred and produced in those toxic environments have adapted to those toxic environments. And when we put them in these healthy environments, they don't do as well, because they're like, where are our drugs, basically? Like, I can't function without that. And so that's part of, why I'm really interested and curious about working with Shumei, because my theory is that when we start producing seeds using natural agriculture practices, we're going to wind up creating seeds that grow healthier, more nutritious, happier plants on natural agriculture farms. So that's part of this journey together, is to really learn about that. But that's my hunch. But a corn that produces its own fertilizer, that's pretty awesome.
So, don't worry, I don't have too much to say. I just want to say thank you, Ken. I'm giving him an opportunity to make a break, but you will all have an opportunity to speak with him there. I also want to say thank you to Tamao Sensei Koyama. And to Hana for inviting us here in the first place. While we're on the gratitude thing, I also, this event could never take place without many, many, many volunteers who I won't even attempt to name them all, but we have volunteers from the community, we have volunteers from Hong Kong, from Japan, from California, from Europe, from everywhere, basically. So a round of applause for all our Hoshi volunteers. I just wrote down a couple of quotes. Actually, I hadn't heard the one from Mokichi Okada Meishu-sama, that seed is the foundation of life. I loved, Ken said, artists are like cultural seed savers. That really struck me. Artists are like cultural seed savers. And defending our ancestral right to care for seeds and for seeds to care for us. Yes. And I heard about him being a special ed teacher, but the Chinese acrobat troupe, no. That was not everything is in common. And now I'm going to confess to, does it feel like I'm just trying to pass the time a little bit? I am. So actually, I will let you go. We'd like to just give Ken and Tamao Sensei just a few minutes in the gallery. So if you would just be so kind as take your time, enjoy. It's not raining yet. There's a cool breeze, so you don't have to rush to the gallery. But if you could give them 5 or 10 minutes, that would be awesome. Thank you very much. This is the we have a hand up. Yes, Mady Bell. So the garden is open. We're more than welcome to go down there. I can't promise. We'll see if we can send one of our farmers down there. I'm not sure if they will be there, but yes, please. Our garden is directly across the street. You'll see it. You'll see some greenhouses. So yeah, great. Thanks for asking that question. And whoa, Mark. Oh, you're helping me pass the time. I love you, Pam.
So Matthew, I'll come here so I can
Oh yeah.
a little bit. I teach presentation skills, and I found what Ken Greene just did as one of the most inspiring presentations I've ever seen. And that camera caught it. So what I'm wondering is if there could be a request that that video be made as a way to promote his fabulous work as well as Shumei. I don't know if that's a plan.
I think we just had the request. There could be, there was, there is. Yes, I think we're getting better at doing that these days. So I will follow up on that, and I will see if we can get it posted online, and probably, so you may not all be on our email list, but what we would do is post a link on the ShumeiCrestone.org site and Shumei America site and send it out via our email list, so to sort of, or you can always call me and ask. So yes, I will. I agree. He's amazing. And Crystal? Okay, we're having an auction for this highest. No, I'm kidding. So it's a well, there may be. So it's the M from the Miho Museum. If anybody did anybody hear about it? And where did we find it, Crystal? Okay, at the wine tasting table. How much wine had they tasted? No. How does that fall off? Anyway, so I don't see any hands going up, but if anybody happens to run into anybody who lost that, I will hold on to it, and it will be in the office. Thank you. I see that, yes. So again, the gallery will be open until 5 o'clock, and please visit the garden, and it's pretty open and casual. And again, thank you. This is sort of the final organized event of our 60th anniversary, so thank you all for making it so wonderful. Thank you.